you fall 2 miles out of the sky without a parachute, you die. It is biologically impossible to survive. But in 1971, a commercial jet was ripped apart by a storm, plunging 92 people into the deadliest jungle on Earth. Only one person survived the fall, a 17-year-old girl, and her nightmare was just beginning. On Christmas Eve, 1971, a commercial passenger jet took off from Peru, carrying 92 passengers toward the Amazon rainforest. Among them was a 17-year-old girl named Juliane Koepcke, traveling with her mother. She had just graduated high school and was heading home for the holidays. The flight was only supposed to take 1 hour, but 40 minutes in, the bright sky ahead turned violently pitch black. Instead of turning around, the pilots made a fatal decision to fly LANSA Flight 508 directly into the center of a massive, terrifying thunderstorm. Inside the cabin, the turbulence became horrific. Luggage flew from the overhead bins, and passengers began screaming in absolute terror. Juliane looked out the window and saw a blinding flash of white light. A massive lightning bolt struck the right wing. The fuel tank instantly ignited in seconds. The intense aerodynamic pressure violently ripped the entire commercial airplane into pieces in midair. At 2 miles above the earth, the cabin floor disappeared. Juliane was suddenly free-falling through the freezing, chaotic storm. Still firmly strapped into her row of 3 seats, she plummeted 10,000 feet directly toward the Amazon rainforest. She fell for almost 2 miles. The wind roared in her ears, and the violently spinning force caused her to completely black out. Surviving a fall from that altitude is biologically impossible. The impact alone should have instantly shattered every bone in her body, but miraculously, the heavy row of seas acted like a helicopter blade, catching the violent wind and slowing her failed descent just enough. She crashed through the incredibly dense, thick vines of the jungle canopy, which acted like a giant net, cushioning her final impact. When she finally opened her eyes the next morning, she was completely alone on the muddy floor of the deepest Amazon jungle. She had a severe concussion, a broken collarbone, and a deep, bleeding gash on her right arm, but she was miraculously alive. She had lost her glasses in the fall, making the dark, dense Amazon jungle an incredibly blurry, terrifying maze of green shadows. Worse, she was missing one shoe. She had to navigate the deadliest jungle on Earth with an entirely bare, bleeding foot. Searching the wreckage, she found absolutely no survivors. Her only piece of survival gear was a small, torn bag of hard candy. But Juliane had one massive advantage. Her parents were brilliant biologists, and she had grown up in a remote jungle research station. She remembered her father's most critical survival rule. If you are ever lost in the jungle, you must immediately find running water. A tiny stream will flow into a larger river, and rivers will eventually lead to lagers or indigenous human settlements. She found a small, trickling creek and began to walk. But the Amazon riverbeds are incredibly treacherous and swarming with deadly predators. The shallow water was filled with massive, venomous stingrays hiding just beneath the muddy sand. One wrong step would be completely fatal. She used a heavy wooden branch to carefully prod the dark mud in front of her bare foot with every single step. For food, she relied entirely on her tiny bag of candy. She refused to eat beautiful jungle fruits, knowing they were poisonous. At night, she huddled helplessly under massive fern leaves, shivering violently as torrential, freezing thunderstorms relentlessly pounded the dark jungle. On her 5th day, she heard the roaring engines of massive military rescue planes circling high above the thick green canopy. She screamed frantically into the sky, but the towering 100-foot-tall Amazon trees completely blocked her from view. She was entirely invisible. The planes eventually flew away, leaving her in absolute suffocating silence. The world had officially given up. She was completely alone. By day 9, her candy ran out. Severe starvation set in, and the brutal humidity began to rot the wounds on her body. A deep gash on her right arm became severely infected. Jungle flies had laid eggs directly inside the open, bleeding cut. Dozens of flesh-eating maggots had hatched and were actively eating her alive from the inside out. The pain was absolutely excruciating. She knew that if the infection reached her bloodstream, she would die in agony. She was completely exhausted and delirious. On her 10th day, dragging her broken body through the mud, she rounded a river bend and saw an impossible miracle. Tied to a heavy log on the muddy riverbank was a small, crude wooden motorboat. It was the first sign of humanity. She collapsed onto the muddy riverbank next to the boat. Nearby, she found a small wooden shelter with a rusty barrel of gasoline. She remembered her father once treating a sick dog by pouring gasoline into a wound to suffocate flesh-eating parasites. She crawled to the barrel, siphoned the toxic fuel into a small tube, and poured the raw gasoline directly into her open, bleeding wound. The excruciating pain was blinding, but the brutal tactic worked perfectly. The suffocating maggots rushed to the surface of her skin. She spent the next hour painfully pulling over 30 dead parasites out of her own arm, saving her life from a massive blood infection. Exhausted and bleeding, she collapsed onto the wooden floor of the small shelter, completely blacking out from 11 days of absolute torture. The next morning, she was awakened by a sound she hadn't heard in almost 2 weeks. Human voices speaking Spanish. 3 local Peruvian lumbermen had returned to their boat. When they saw the muddy, bleeding girl, they thought she was a terrifying jungle spirit. She spoke to them in perfect Spanish, explaining who she was. The men immediately fed her and placed her gently into their boat. They navigated the treacherous river for 7 hours, finally delivering her to a local hospital where her frantic father was waiting. Her incredible survival became a global phenomenon, but the story did not have a completely happy ending. As soon as she recovered, Juliane bravely boarded a helicopter with military rescue teams to help them locate the exact site of the wreckage. When they finally found the smoking crater, investigators made a devastating discovery about the other passengers, Flight 508. She wasn't the only one to survive the 2-mile fall. At least 14 other people initially survived the impact into the trees. But unlike her, they were severely paralyzed by their injuries. They could not walk to find water, because the rescue planes were blocked by the dense, towering canopy. Those 14 survivors slowly died while waiting for a rescue that never came. Tragically, one of those initial survivors was her mother. She lived for several days before succumbing to her massive injuries alone in the mud. If Juliane had stayed at the crash site waiting for help like the others, she would have absolutely died with them. Her story remains one of the most incredible testaments to the sheer, primal human instinct to survive the most hostile environment on Earth. But the Amazon jungle is a known enemy. We know what hides in the dark leaves, what happens when the mystery comes from above. In 1977, a scientist was casually scanning the deep vacuum of space with a massive radio telescope. Suddenly, the machine picked up a signal, a frequency so powerful, so specific, and so mathematically perfect, it completely shocked the scientific world. It lasted exactly 72 seconds. It originated from the constellation Sagittarius, completely empty space where absolutely nothing should exist. The astronomer printed the data, grabbed a red pen, and wrote one single, terrified word next to the massive anomaly: wow. To this day, 40 years later, no natural phenomenon can perfectly explain it, and the message was never repeated. Click the video on your screen to uncover the terrifying, unsolved mystery of the wow signal.